There's a single letter written inside every one of your cells. And if you carry type O positive blood, that letter has been quietly telling a story about you since long before your parents were born, long before your country existed, long before the first human being ever stood upright and looked at the stars. For most of human history, nobody could read it. People saw blood. They saw that. It was red. They saw that it spilled and that it healed, and they assumed that one person's blood was more or less the same as another's. Then came the transfusions that killed instead of saved, the mysterious deaths on operating tables, the patients who received the gift of blood and died within minutes as their own bodies turned against the very thing meant to rescue them. Something invisible was at work, something written in a code no one could yet see. And now, after more than a century of science clawing its way down to the level of the molecule, that code has finally been read, letter by letter. And what it reveals about type O positive blood is stranger, older, and more humbling than almost anyone expected. Let us start with the truth about the O itself, because this is where nearly everyone gets it wrong. People imagine that blood types are like flavors, that A is one recipe, B is another, and O is a third, each one adding its own special ingredient to the mixture. That is not what your DNA says. Your blood type is decided by a single gene sitting on the long arm of chromosome 9, and this gene carries the instructions for building a tiny molecular machine, an enzyme whose only job is to decorate the surface of your red blood cells. Think of every red cell in your body as a smooth, round stone, and imagine that this enzyme is a craftsman whose task is to glue a particular sugar onto the surface of that stone. In a person with type A blood, the craftsman glues on one kind of sugar. In a person with type B, he glues on a slightly different one. But in a person with type O, something remarkable has happened. The craftsman is broken. He shows up for work, he holds his tools, but he cannot glue anything at all, and so the surface of your red cells stays bare. Here is the part that stuns people when they first understand it. The O in your blood is not an addition. It is a subtraction. It is an absence. Deep in the gene, at a very precise location, a single microscopic piece of the code has gone missing. Just one. Geneticists have pinned it down to the exact spot. A lost building block near position 261, one solitary letter deleted out of the entire chain, and that one deletion is enough to throw the whole set of instructions out of alignment. It is like removing a single letter from the middle of a sentence and every word after it collapse into nonsense. The enzyme that gets built from these scrambled instructions is useless. It cannot do its job. It cannot lay down the sugar. And so, if you are type O, your red blood cells wear no coat, carry no flag, display none of the markings that A and B blood proudly wear. Your DNA did not give you something extra. Your DNA revealed that you are, at the deepest level, beautifully, defiantly bare. For years, scientists suspected this but could not prove it. And it was only when researchers managed to sequence the ABO gene down to its individual letters that the truth stood exposed. They lined up the code from a person with type A beside the code from a person with type O, and they searched, and there it was. The missing piece, the single deleted letter that separated one destiny from another. It was a quiet moment in a laboratory, no drama, no fanfare, just numbers on a screen. And yet, in that moment, a mystery that had killed patients for generations finally gave up its secret. The reason O blood behaves the way it does, the reason it can be given to so many, the reason it carries no A or B markings, was not magic and not mysticism. It was one missing letter in a code 3 billion letters long. It is worth pausing to remember how recently we learned any of this, because it makes the discovery feel even more astonishing. For almost the entire span of human history, nobody knew that blood came in types at all. Doctors tried transfusions and watched patients die, and they could not understand why one transfer of blood healed a patient, while another, seemingly identical, sent that same patient into agony and death within minutes. It was only at the very start of the 20th century that a scientist mixing samples of blood in his laboratory noticed something strange, that when blood from certain people was combined, the red cells clumped together into visible clots, while other combinations mixed smoothly and safely. From those clumps in a dish, the entire map of blood types was slowly drawn, and the letters A, B, and O were assigned to a mystery that had killed for centuries. But even then, no one could say what the letters truly meant. They were labels for a pattern nobody understood, names given to a difference that could be seen but not explained. It would take most of the following century and the arrival of tools capable of reading the code of life itself before anyone could finally point to the exact missing letter in the exact gene and declare, at last, this is what O really is. The truth you now hold was hidden from every physician, every scholar, every dying patient across all of recorded time, until only decades ago. Now hold that thought, because there's a second word hiding in your blood type, and it comes from an entirely different place. When you say you are O positive, the O and the positive are not partners. They are strangers who happen to share the same address. The positive has nothing to do with chromosome 9, nothing to do with the broken sugar gluing enzyme. It comes from a completely separate gene sitting on a completely different chromosome, chromosome 1, and it governs an entirely different kind of marking on your red cells, a protein called the D antigen, better known as the rhesus factor. If you have that protein, you are positive. If you lack it, you're negative. So when your DNA labels you O positive, it is not making one statement about you. It is making two from two different genes on two different chromosomes that were switched on independently generations apart and only meet in the story your body tells. You are not a single instruction. You are a coincidence of ancient decisions. And this is where the story stops being merely biological and starts becoming almost unbelievable, because the deeper scientists dug into the ABO gene, the further back in time it led them, and the further back it led them, the more the ground shifted beneath their feet. You might assume that human blood types are, well, human, that they arose somewhere in our own history, perhaps when our ancestors spread across the continents. Scientists have a name for this. They call it trans-species polymorphism, and the phrase hides one of the most extraordinary facts in all of human biology. It means that the difference between blood types is older than the human species itself. It means that the version of this gene flowing in your veins today was already flowing in some form in a creature that lived tens of millions of years ago, a creature that was neither human nor chimp, but the shared ancestor of both, a creature that watched a world of animals we would not recognize, and never once imagined that one distant descendant would sit in a lit room, staring at a screen, learning that its blood was that old. When you carry type O blood, you're not carrying a modern trait. You are carrying an inheritance so ancient that it survived the entire journey from that forgotten ancestor, through every extinction, every ice age, every migration, every catastrophe that nearly wiped our lineage from the earth, and it arrived intact in you. That raises a question that haunted researchers for decades. Why would something so old survive so long? Evolution is ruthless. It does not preserve things out of sentiment. When a trait sticks around for millions of years, refusing to vanish, refusing to be replaced, it is usually because that trait is doing something important, something worth keeping. And so scientists began to ask what blood type actually does, beyond decorating red cells with sugar, and the answer they uncovered is the reason your blood type may have quietly shaped whether your ancestors lived or died, because the markings on your blood cells are not only seen by your own body, they are seen by your enemies. They are seen by the invisible armies of bacteria, viruses, and parasites that have hunted human beings since the beginning. And to those hunters, your blood type is a doorway, sometimes locked, sometimes wide open. Consider malaria, one of the deadliest killers in the history of our species, a disease that has shaped human evolution more than almost any other. The parasite that causes the worst form of malaria has a terrible trick. Once it infects a red blood cell, it forces that cell to become sticky so that infected cells clump together with healthy ones, forming dense rosettes that jam the narrow passages of your blood vessels, especially in the brain. And this clumping is what turns malaria from a fever into a death sentence. But here is where your blood type steps quietly into the story. In people with type O blood, those bare, unmarked red cells, the parasite struggles to build its deadly rosettes. The clumping is weaker, the obstruction is less severe. And study after study in regions where malaria has raged for thousands of years has found that people with type O blood tend to survive the worst of it more often than those with type A. This is not a small thing. In a world where malaria killed children before they could grow, a blood type that gave even a slight edge against it was a blood type worth passing on, generation after generation, which may be part of why type O is the most common blood type on Earth today. But nature is never generous without also being cruel. The same bare cells that shield you from one enemy can leave a different door unlocked for another. The story of type O blood is not a story of pure advantage. It is a story of trade-offs written across millions of years, and your DNA reveals both sides of the ledger. Take the humble but vicious world of cholera, a disease that empties the body of its fluids and can kill a healthy adult in a single day. Some studies suggest that people with type O blood, so protected against malaria, may actually suffer more severe cholera when they catch it. The very same bareness that confuses the malaria parasite seems to leave type O individuals more vulnerable to the toxin that drives cholera's devastating course. Nature gave with one hand and took with the other, and the fact that type O still survived and spread so widely tells you just how valuable that malaria protection must have been to tip the balance. There is more written in your blood, and some of it concerns not ancient plagues, but the quieter dangers of the modern body. Deep in the chemistry of your blood lies a delicate balance between bleeding and clotting, between blood that flows too freely and blood that thickens and jams. Your body walks a razor's edge here every single day, and it turns out that your blood type helps decide which side of that edge you lean. toward. People with type O blood tend to carry lower levels of certain clotting proteins, particularly a molecule called von Willebrand factor and its partner, factor VIII. These are the substances that help your blood form clots when you're injured, and in type O individuals, they run a little lower than in people with A, B, or AB blood. The consequence is subtle but real. Type O blood, on average, slightly less prone to forming dangerous clots inside the veins, the kind of clots that can travel to the lungs and kill without warning, the kind that lurk behind strokes and certain heart attacks. Your bare-celled, ancient, malaria-resistant blood also happens to be, statistically, a little more forgiving of the clotting dangers that plague the modern heart. And yet, once again, the ledger has two columns because that same lower level of clotting factors means that when type O individuals do bleed, whether from injury, from surgery, or from conditions like ulcers, they may bleed a little more than others. Which brings us to the stomach and to a bacterium that lives in the guts of billions of people, a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori, that burrows into the stomach lining and can cause painful ulcers. Research has long noticed that people with type O blood appear somewhat more prone to certain peptic ulcers, and the leading suspicion is that the bare surface of their cells and the matching markings in their stomach lining offer this particular bacterium an easier foothold. So the picture that emerges from the DNA is not the simple tale of a superior blood type that clickbait headlines love to sell. It is something far more interesting and far more honest. Type O is a blood type of trade-offs, of ancient bargains struck between your ancestors and the diseases that hunted them, a hand of cards dealt millions of years ago and still being played inside you today. Now, because we are being honest, we have to walk carefully through the swamp of myths that has grown up around blood types, because your DNA has quietly demolished several of the most popular beliefs, and knowing the difference between the science and the stories is part of understanding who you really are. Perhaps the most famous myth is the idea that people with type O blood should eat like ancient hunters, that because O is supposedly the oldest and most primal blood type, its carriers thrive on meat and struggle with grains, and that following a special blood type diet will unlock health and vitality. It is a seductive idea. It feels true. It has sold millions of books, and when scientists finally put it to a rigorous test, comparing people who followed these blood type diets against those who did not, they found that the diets did indeed sometimes improve people's health, but not for the reason claimed. The improvements happened regardless of blood type. A type A person and a type O person following the so-called correct diet both improved, and both improved by the same amount, which is precisely the result you would expect if the blood type had nothing whatsoever to do with it, and the benefit came simply from eating more carefully. The DNA does not support the diet. The idea that your blood type dictates what you should eat is a story we told ourselves, a comforting pattern laid over a reality that does not contain it. Then there is the belief, enormously popular in some parts of the world, that your blood type shapes your personality, that type O people are natural leaders, confident, outgoing, decisive, while other types are shy or sensitive or creative. Entire cultures take this seriously. People consult blood type before dating, before hiring, before marriage. And yet, when researchers examine it under controlled conditions, testing thousands of people, comparing their personalities against their blood types with careful statistics, the connection simply dissolves. There is no measurable link between the bare surface of your red cells and the shape of your character. Your ambition, your kindness, your temper, your gentleness, these are written in 1,000 places in your experiences, your upbringing, the vast orchestra of other genes, but not in the single small gene on chromosome 9 that decides whether a sugar sits on your blood cells. The DNA is silent on your personality. It reveals your ancient past, your disease resistances, your quiet chemical balances, but it does not and cannot tell you whether you are brave. And then there are the wilder stories, the ones that drift into the territory of the mysterious and the impossible, the claims that certain blood types, especially rare ones, mark their carriers as descendants of ancient visitors, of beings not entirely of this earth, of bloodlines that fell from the sky. These stories cluster most often around Rh negative blood, the mirror image of your positive, and they make for thrilling telling. But the truth your DNA reveals is, in its own way, far more astonishing than any of these fantasies, because it does not need to invent aliens to make you extraordinary. The real story, the one written in the code, is that your blood carries a variation older than your species, forged in the fires of ancient plagues, preserved across millions of years of struggle, shared with creatures who lived and died before humanity existed. You do not need to have come from the stars to be a walking miracle of deep time. You already are one, and the proof is in every drop. So let us return to that single missing letter, the deletion that makes you type O, and ask what it truly means to carry it. It means that at some unknowable moment in the distant past, In an ancestor whose face you will never see, a tiny error crept into the code. One letter slipped away, and the enzyme that would have decorated the blood fell silent. That error should, by all logic, have been a defect, a flaw, a broken machine. And yet, instead of being erased by evolution, it spread. It thrived. It became the single most common blood type on the entire planet. What began as a copying mistake in one long-forgotten body became the shared inheritance of billions, a testament to the strange truth that, in the story of life, what looks like a flaw and what turns out to be a gift are often the same thing, separated only by the circumstances that reveal them. In a world without malaria, the O deletion might have been nothing. In a world where malaria stalked every childhood, it may have been the difference between a family that ended and a family that continued, all the way down to you. Think too about what your blood type has allowed you to become in the modern world. Because here, the ancient bareness of your cells takes on a new and generous meaning. Since your red cells carry no A and no B markings, they do not provoke the alarm that those markings trigger in other people's immune systems. This is why type O blood, and especially type O negative, has earned the title of universal donor, blood that can, in emergencies, be given to people of many other types without the deadly reactions that mismatched blood can cause. When a patient bleeds out in an emergency room, when there is no time to test, when seconds decide everything, it is often type O blood that the doctors reach for first, because it is the safest bet, the blood least likely to be rejected. The very absence that defines you at the genetic level, that single missing letter, that broken enzyme, that bare and unmarked surface, becomes, in the moment of crisis, the reason you can save a stranger's life. What was a subtraction in the code becomes an addition in the world. The nothing on your cells becomes everything to someone else. There's a quiet poetry in that, and it is worth sitting with. Your blood type was not designed. It was not chosen. It arrived through a chain of accidents and pressures, stretching back beyond the beginning of humanity, shaped by parasites you will never see and ancestors you will never know. And yet it ended up making you, in a very real and measurable way, one of the great givers of the modern age, a person whose blood can flow into the veins of strangers and carry them back from the edge of death. The malaria that hunted your ancestors, the plagues that culled the weak, the ruthless arithmetic of survival that kept the O deletion alive through the ages, all of it conspired, without intending to produce a kind of blood that can be given freely to almost anyone. History wrote a gift into you, and it did not even mean to. And so when the DNA is finally read, letter by letter, and the truth of type O positive blood is laid bare, what it reveals is not what the myths promised. It does not reveal a diet you must follow, or a personality you must fit, or a secret ancestry among the stars. It reveals something quieter and infinitely more real. It reveals that you carry a variation older than your own kind, a deletion so ancient it predates the human face. It reveals that this small change in your code once stood between your ancestors and one of the deadliest diseases the world has ever known, tilting the odds of survival just enough that your line endured while others vanished. It reveals a chemistry that leans, ever so slightly, away from the dangerous clots that threaten the modern heart, a set of trade-offs bargained across deep time between protection and vulnerability, between malaria and cholera, between clotting and bleeding, each one a whisper of the pressures your bloodline once faced. And it reveals, finally, that the very emptiness of your cells, the absence that a broken enzyme carved into your blood, is the same emptiness that lets you become a universal giver, a person whose blood can cross the boundaries that separate one human being from another. That is the truth the DNA finally revealed, and it is a truth that reframes the entire question. We spend so much time imagining that what makes us special must be something added, some extra gift, some bonus written into us that others lack. But the story of type O blood suggests something far more profound. Sometimes what makes you extraordinary is not what you have, but what you lack. Not the sugar added, but the sugar absent. Not the present, but the surface left bare. In a strange and beautiful inversion, your blood tells you that an absence can be an inheritance, that a missing letter can be a form of protection, that a subtraction can become a gift great enough to save a life. The bareness that a broken enzyme left on your cells is not a deficiency. It is a signature written in the oldest ink there is, the ink of deep time and ancient survival, passed down through an unbroken chain of ancestors who each, in turn, lived long enough to hand it on to you. So the next time you see your blood type printed on a card, on a form, on a hospital bracelet, and you read those simple characters, O positive, remember what they actually contain. Remember that the O is not a flavor, but an absence, a single missing letter near position 261 in a gene on chromosome 9, a deletion so old it is shared with creatures that lived tens of millions of years before the first human breath. Remember that the positive comes from somewhere else entirely, a separate gene on a separate chromosome, a second and unrelated decision that only happens to share your body with the first. Remember that this combination, this quiet coincidence of ancient switches, once helped your ancestors outlast the diseases that hunted them, and still today shapes the delicate balance of clotting and bleeding within you, still today makes your blood one of the most freely givable substances in all of medicine. And remember, above all, that none of this was designed for you, and yet all of it arrived in you, the endpoint of a story millions of years long. A story you did not write, but which is written, indelibly, in every cell you carry. Because that is what the DNA finally revealed when at last we learned to read it. Not a fantasy, not a diet, not a destiny among the stars. Something better. It revealed that the blood in your veins is a living record of survival, older than humanity, shaped by ancient plagues, balanced between danger and protection, and generous enough, in the end, to be given away to save the lives of strangers. It revealed that you are not the beginning of anything. You are the continuation of everything, an unbroken thread reaching back beyond the dawn of your species. And the proof of it is not hidden in the sky or in some secret bloodline, but in the quiet, ordinary, extraordinary truth of a single missing letter, carried faithfully through the ages and beating right now inside of you.